So as a summary of the competition, so we're really looking, as I mentioned, to support innovative business-led research and development in design, development, and manufacture of batteries for electric vehicles. And we're really emphasizing in this competition the de-risking of scaling up of technologies and building supply chains in the UK. So we have two streams to this competition. So we've got up to £2 million available for feasibility studies. These can be 3 to 12 months and up to £500,000 in total project costs. So that's the total cost of the project, including match funding from business. The grant available would be lower than that. And for the larger collaborative research and development projects, there's up to £23 million available. So these projects can be 3 to 18 months. That is a very hard upper limit in terms of the time, in terms of the length of the project. And these projects can also be pretty large, so 500,000 up to £15 million in total project costs. And all projects in this competition must be completed by the 31st of March 2021. So we're really looking for projects that support the overall goal of the Faraday Battery Challenge, so UK becoming a leader in the design, development, and manufacture of batteries for electric vehicles. And just to highlight, you'll probably hear this several times over the next 2 hours, but the deadline is 12 noon on the 12th of December, so there's no flex in that. Please make sure that you submit well in advance of that to avoid any last-minute scrambles. So Joe and Jonathan will be going through the eligibility in detail in a moment. But just to iterate that we're really looking to support UK-based businesses to grow and develop the technology in the UK, who are looking to exploit their technology in the UK. All projects need to be collaborative, and in terms of participation from research organizations, this can be up to 30% of the total project costs. One item which I'd like to highlight here is it's not a hard and fast rule, but we are encouraging you to include a partner who has expertise in the scaling of battery technologies. So who or what this means will very much depend on the focus of your particular project. But in the application questions, we do ask you to demonstrate that your consortium is suitably experienced to be able to actually take your project through. And for the scope of this competition, that involves an appreciation of what is required to scale your technology. And then just briefly, so we do have a lot of questions about non-UK work and international participants. So we cannot fund work, we cannot fund companies doing work outside of the UK unless a small amount of subcontracting is necessary, but this needs to be very, very clearly justified. But we can have international partners within the consortia, but they do not claim grant funding, so that is one route. I'm happy to answer more questions on that if they come up. So in terms of the actual details of the scope, what we're looking for in this competition. So I've already mentioned this, but we're really looking for projects focused on design and development of batteries for electric vehicles and emphasizing making it easier to scale that technology, so de-risking the scale-up of that technology and building supply chains in the UK. So what we're asking is that the projects really do have to de-risk the scale of the technologies across the battery value chain. So this is from cell up to module and pack, but we are not including vehicle integration in this particular competition. And or remove the technical or commercial barriers to cell manufacture in the UK, and again, supporting this overall goal of the Faraday Battery Challenge. So we're looking for projects which improve the scalability and manufacturability of batteries for automotive in some way. But we are allowing projects which involve development for other sectors, such as rail, marine, aerospace, defense, or other applications. So as long as an element of that technology could also be applied to automotive. So this is a bit more flexible than we've in previous competitions in terms of other applications, but it is very key that there is an element of crossover that could be applied to automotive from the project. And the project can focus on technological improvements, or it can look at developing new business models, again, to address breaking down the commercial and technical barriers to innovation in this area. And we're also encouraging projects which bring new investment or new businesses into the sector in the UK. So perhaps companies that are working in different areas currently but have applicable technology which can be brought into battery technology. So within the project, we're asking that you develop the understanding and processes needed to scale your technology following the end of the project. And looking to support projects addressing the technical and commercial challenges surrounding battery development. So this includes, obviously, the cost reduction, energy density improvements, power density improvements, addressing safety concerns, first life, broadening the temperature ranges, predictability, and recyclability. We're asking that the proposals demonstrate how the project will improve the manufacturing readiness level of your technology. So this is important if we're looking at how we're to scale the technology beyond the project or within the project itself, that there is some improvement in how we're actually going to, or understanding of the processes of how to actually manufacture that technology to be able to get it to market more quickly. So the project can either focus directly on improving this, or it can create manufacturing processes or supply chain enhancements that will lead to an improved MRL. So examples of ways of doing this are more flexible and efficient processes, processes enabling faster and greater customization of the product to satisfy customer demands, and materials that make manufacturing easier. We're asking for projects to consider the end-of-life implications and have a clear route to scale the technology beyond a prototype or demonstrator following the conclusion of the project. We also need to see consideration of the appropriate sector's performance and regulatory targets and a plan for a real-world application of the technology. And again, another aspect is showing a thorough understanding of the system that the technology will fit into. So some suggestions of areas that could be worked on as part of this. So could look at chemicals or cell components, again, as part of building the supply chain, is an area that is of interest. Also, we talked about this earlier, but there's a lot of crossover from, or a lot of pull from niche vehicles, and in terms of high power, high performance applications that then feed into higher volume automotive. So this is another area where projects could look to focus their attention. And for the CR&D projects, we're also looking or encouraging projects which build on the work of successful round one feasibility studies which have come through Faraday already. In terms of the out-of-scope areas, so we will not be funding projects which are focused on high technology readiness level technologies with high total project costs. So projects focused on modules and packs, as these can have routes to be funded through the Advanced Propulsion Center. We're not funding projects focused on vehicle integration. And we are also not funding projects with low TRL, as these could be funded perhaps through the Faraday Institution or through other routes designed for fundamental research. We've also not able to fund mid-TRL projects in the typical Innovate UK TRL range, which do not consider how the technology will be scaled beyond demonstrator or prototype level. So very sort of early stage projects within that TRL range will not be eligible for funding in this competition. And we can also not support projects or funding for capital equipment which could not be accessed through other means. So just to sort of bring this back up again as a visual representation of where we're looking to support the technology. So in terms of the cell materials, really looking to pull through to higher TRL. We've got a lot of earlier TRL work going on in that area and want to support companies taking that closer to market. We want to support the cell manufacturing and processes, and also the thermal BMS and module, because there's a lot of gains to be made in terms of scaling technology around developing processes for module and pack assembly, and the technology around creating those. So to sort of summarize then, again, so to reiterate the summary of the competition. So really looking at projects working towards design, development, and manufacture of batteries for electric vehicles, de-risking scale, and building supply chains. So there's the two streams, the feasibility studies to sort of test newer ideas, again, still focused on moving towards scale, but perhaps it's a new area for your company. And then the larger research and development projects, so limited to 18 months, but there's scope to do a lot in that time frame. And again, supporting the overall goal of the Faraday Battery Challenge. So very brief overview on this, because I know that Joe and Jonathan will go into detail around this side. But just to briefly highlight how the competition process works. So we have the call for proposals, so this is what we're doing now. And then we have the submissions from industry, which may include academic partners and research and technology organizations. Those proposals are scored and ranked, and then we'll have interviews for the CR&D. And then the top-ranking projects at the end of that process will be awarded funding. So partners then run their projects. So we do have monitoring officers from Innovate UK who will help to make sure that these projects run to keep on track. So it's not the fire and forget that we were discussing earlier for some other structures. But yeah, so these projects are monitored, but it's up to you to run them as you have proposed. And then just a couple of tips and support. So please do get in touch with us early if you have any questions about the scope or application process, or if you need help finding partners. There is a little bit of flex in terms of those ranges of funds that I mentioned earlier. And if you have an absolutely amazing project, but it needs to come in a little bit under one of the limits or a little bit over, then please do get in touch. And this needs to come into us at least 10 working days before the deadline. So if you contact Innovate UK, but all the requests will come to me. So yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions, and please do get in touch early. And another avenue for support is the Knowledge Transfer Network. So NAS, who many of you will have met today, is a key contact there in terms of everything batteries. And as Bruce was talking about earlier, they can provide support in finding partners and also in reviewing applications and providing advice on that front. So again, highly recommended to get in touch with them earlier on, especially if you're new to Innovate UK competitions. And just to reiterate, please read the scope thoroughly and the application questions, and submitting a bit before the 12 o'clock deadline on the 12th is definitely advisable. So then in terms of key dates, so we opened on Monday. Obviously, the deadline application is critical. So there will be interviews for the R&D. The invites for those come out in January, and then the interviews are held in February. And applicants for all competitions will be informed on the 22nd of February, 2019. And just a flag, if you would like to come and see this again, or if you would like the opportunity to network and give pitches at another event, we're running one in Cardiff next Tuesday. So that's joint with IDP 15, which is a related competition, which I'll say a couple of words on in a moment, and also a Wave 2 workshop with the Faraday Institution. And actually, I meant to mention, in terms of support, Faraday Institution also have a huge amount of expertise in the area. If you're have questions about a particular technology or looking, again, for inspiration in terms of partners, then they are another resource in this area. And then the other event is Sunderland on the 26th of September. So this is, again, a joint event with IDP 15. And we will be having a focused workshop looking at the chemical supply chain opportunities. So just to flag quickly then, if what we've talked about doesn't quite fit, but you are looking at low emission technologies, or you have an interest in power electronics, power electronics and energy storage for vehicle applications, IDP 15 is another competition which we have open at the moment. It's been run by my colleague, David Tozer. And there's a briefing event actually in here tomorrow for that, but I just wanted to flag the information to you. So Again, this is up to 22 million available for R&D in this area, and it's looking at projects on power electronics, machines and drives, energy storage and energy management, lightweight vehicle and powertrain structures, and highly disruptive zero-emission technologies. So I would encourage you, if this is of interest, I can put you in touch with David, and there will be the joint briefing events coming up as well as the briefing event tomorrow.
Hello, everyone. So me and Joe will talk you through the process of applying through Innovate. So as on the screen, I'm Jonathan. I'm joined by my colleague Joe. We work in the portfolio management team within Innovate UK, and we manage all the applications received in the competition process. So what we'll run through today is the eligibility criteria, which is very important for this competition. We'll run through the application process, so mainly how you use IFS, or an Innovation Funding Portal. And then Joe will walk you through the application finances and the assessment process. So the eligibility criteria for this competition, so the lead must be a UK-based business or research and technology organisation. The project must be collaborative, and you must carry out the project in the UK and must intend to exploit the results from the project in the UK. For the feasibility study, the project costs can be up to 500,000, and the projects must last for 3 to 12 months. For the R&D projects, the project cost must be between 500,000 and 15 million, and projects can last for 3 to 18 months. The maximum research contribution is 30% of the total eligible project costs. Within the application form, there are 10 marked questions, and for 4 of them, you can submit an appendices, so that's question 2, 3, 7, and 8. And you can also have an academic within your application, so they submit a JES output. So on the screen now, you'll see the type of organisations that Innovate UK funds. So primarily we fund businesses, but we also fund research organisations. That includes universities, so on and so forth. We also support public sector organisations, but the main factor is that they all must be based within the UK. And as I said earlier on, the lead for this competition must be a UK business or RTO. So before you start an application with Innovate UK, you must think about the state aid and the eligibility criteria, obviously. So there is a new test that we've introduced so that you comply with the state aid requirements. This check is to confirm to us that your organisation is able to sustain itself during the length of the project. And this affects organisations that are 3 or more years old. However, you're exempt from this test if you're a research and technology organisation, a public sector organisation, companies limited by guarantee, academics, and businesses under 3 years old. Should you be successful and we find that this affects your organisation, Innovate UK will be in contact with you to discuss the way forward. If you do have any queries on this, and if you don't understand what I've just told you, there is actually further guidance online with our general guidance for applicants, and this goes into detail about what you have to do and so on and so forth. So now I'll run through the participation rules. So the aim of state aid is to optimise the level of funding to businesses, and we recognise the importance of that to the research base. So at least 70% of the total eligible project costs must be incurred by a business. And then the maximum level of academic participation is 30%, and that can be shared out between multiple academic organisations or research organisations, I should say, but they cannot exceed 30%. So if you've got 2 research organisations there, they must split the 30%. So what is a genuine, or what does collaborative look like? at least 2 organisations must be claiming grant within the application. So a business or an RTO-led consortium, which may involve both business and the research base. So you can have the 2 organisations plus more. It's just what's right for your application. But we must see within your application a genuine level of collaboration. So making more than one application and resubmissions. Any one research and technology organisation may be only be the lead partner in one application. There must be at least 2 other UK businesses claiming grant. If they are leading an application, they may be involved in up to 3 applications to this competition. If a research and technology organisation is not the lead on any application, they can partner in any number of applications. If an application is unsuccessful, you can use the feedback you receive to apply for the same project into another round of this competition or another competition. So if you have any other Innovate UK funded projects currently live, this applies to you. So if you have an outstanding final claim or an independent accountant report on any live Innovate UK project, you will not be eligible to apply for grant funding in this competition as a lead or as a partner organisation. If you've applied to a previous competition as the lead or a sole company and were awarded funding by Innovate UK but did not make a substantial effort to exploit that award, we will make no award of funding to you. So on the screen now are the dates. So obviously this competition opened on the 17th of September. The briefing to date is today. The submission deadline is the 12th of December. So as Anna said, this was at noon. It will be at noon, so I should say. And if we have applications 1 minute past that time, they will be not considered for assessment. So that is a hard deadline. And we always advise that you submit your application well in advance of that, just because to avoid any technical difficulties, if you want to ask a scope question, or if you have any questions around the application process or the assessment process, you need to get them in before then. And the applicants will be informed if they're successful on the 22nd of February 2019. So I'll now run through about how you use IFS, so the Innovation Funding Service. So when you go into the web and you go to Innovate, you can search for the different funding competitions that we have live currently. So once you click into a specific competition, you can look through the eligibility criteria, the scope details, the specific milestones for the competition, about how you apply and answer questions, and there's also further supporting information on there. And that's on our webpage for the duration of the competition open period. So if you do decide to apply, and we hope you do, you'll have to create an account if you haven't already. So the lead applicant will have to go into IFS, create an account, and businesses can use Companies House to input their details. But we suggest if you're a research organisation or any other organisation that you manually input your information just to save you being categorised as a business. But when you do start an application and you sign up to IFS, you'll be signing up to the terms and conditions of an Innovate UK grant award. These are viewable at any time through your application, and you'll be able to see the progress of your application, about what percentage it's complete, and you can also invite partners from your own organisation or from different organisations to participate in your application. So you will input an email address and a name, and IFS will send them an invitation to join the application and create an account, and they will also have to sign up to the T's and C's of Innovate UK. So as well as that, you can assign different questions and different sections of the application to different partners or different people in your organisation. So they can fill out, for example, a specific part of the question, so on and so forth. So when you're filling out a question, you will have something what looks like this. So someone will be assigned to you. You can format it. You can spell check it. It'll tell you the word count. And for each question as well, the guidance for each question is listed when you fill out the question as well. So it's very easy to just refer back to the question itself. And if you want someone else to check it, you can assign it back to them to complete. So the application itself is split into 3 sections. So you have the project details and the application questions, and then the very interesting financial section. So I'll just run through the first bit of the application. So the first section, the project details. You will have to import a title for your application, input the timescales, the research category that you are undertaking, and whether this is a resubmission. You will then be asked to import a project summary. So this should be a short summary of your project, and it's on the objectives of it and what is innovative about this project. And also you'll be asked to fill out a public description. So this description is a high-level view of your project, and this will be published if your application is successful. As we are a government-funded body, we are required to publish the projects that we fund. So you've got to be aware of confidentiality when you fill out that public description, and only put what you want to be into the public domain, essentially. And you will also be asked to fill out the scope section. So how does your project align with the scope of this competition? And if your project is not in scope, it will be ineligible for funding. So all these sections are not marked. They're just to give us context and overview of the application. And they'd be used by the assessors as well for that purpose. So on the next slide, here is the main part, the second section, the application questions. So like I said, there are 10 mark questions, all marked out at 10. They are so on the screen, and for each question, you'll be able to find the guidance online, and they go into detail what you need to include in that section and how you submit. For question 2, 3, 7, and 8, you can submit an appendices attachment to those questions, and that's the guidance for that is included in the guidance for applicants as well, so there's no need to worry about that. And I'll now hand over to my colleague Joe, who will run through the application finances.
Thank you, Jonathan. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Joe Lyford. I'm the portfolio manager for these competitions from Innovate UK. So essentially, I will be managing the internal process for these competitions up to the point that successful applicants actually begin working on their projects. I'm here to talk to you about 3 things today, really. I'm going to talk to you about the funding rules that we have in place for this competition, how to actually submit an application to us within the Innovation Funding Service, and finally, what should happen should you be successful in applying for these competitions. So, in terms of the finances, the finance section for industry partners, first and foremost, within IFS is split into 3 different areas, as you can see on the screen. And each organisation must complete each of these areas individually before an application can actually be submitted to us. The areas are your project cost, your organisation, and your funding, and I'll take you through each of these now. So the first area we have is your project costs, and for those of you who may have applied to us in previous competitions, you will be familiar with the standard eligible cost categories that we have on the screen. You as applicants will need to enter the detail behind any of the categories that you require to actually deliver your project. And the Innovation Funding Service will actually calculate the total values for you to produce your total project costs. Once you are happy that all of your project costs have been added to the system and everything that you need to deliver your project has been incorporated within these categories, then you will be given a final opportunity to review, and you will also need to confirm to us that your costs are eligible as per the project cost guidance that you can find available online. And then when you're happy that you've added your cost successfully, then you can simply save and mark the section as complete. I'm not going to go through in detail all of these cost categories just because we don't have the time today, but there is plenty of guidance available online as to what is and what is not eligible within these categories, and also actually how to complete the finance section within the Innovation Funding Service as well. The next area of the finance section is your organisation, as highlighted. And in this section, you need to enter details relating specifically to your organisation, such as its size, which will then determine the level of grant that you are eligible to receive from us. And if you are a newly incorporated organisation and you wish to take part in an application, then you can simply enter 0 values for the financial areas, like in the example that you can see on the screen. And the final area of the finance section is your funding. Now, the level of grant that you can receive from Innovate UK depends on 2 factors, really. It depends, firstly, on the type of organisation that you are and the size of that organisation, and secondly, on the type of research that your project actually represents. And the Innovation Funding Service will calculate your grant based on these 2 criteria. So on this slide, you can see the funding rules that we have in place for both of these competitions. Businesses are quite clearly outlined on the slide. For feasibility study projects or those that are industrial research within the research and development stream, you can receive up to 70% grant funding if you're micro or small, 60% for medium, and 50% for large. And then we also have experimental development projects within the research and development stream. And for these, you can receive up to 45% grant funding if you are micro or small, 35% if you're medium, and 25% if you are large. In terms of research organisations, university partners can claim 100% funding, which is 80% of the full economic cost. Other research organisations can also claim 100% grant funding, but they must be non-profit distributing and they must clearly disseminate their project results. And likewise, we also allow public sector organisations or charities to claim 100% grant funding from us as well. But again, they must be performing research, and again, they must clearly be disseminating their project results. So in the example that you can see on the screen now, you can see that the maximum level of grant entitled to this applicant is 70% based on the details that they have provided within the Innovation Funding Service. You also need to state here whether you have any other public funding in place to actually deliver your project, as this will actually reduce the grant that you are eligible to receive from us. And it's also here where you need to confirm that you agree to the terms and conditions of the competition and of the award as well. These used to be outlined in something called a conditional offer letter, which we no longer use for competitions that run through our Innovation Funding Service platform. So as I mentioned, you do need to tell us if you have any other public funding in place for your project. If you have received funding for previous work, which has then led to you applying for this competition and deliver a subsequent project, that's fine. You don't need to worry about that, sorry. That would not need to be listed in your application at all. But obviously any funding that you have in place from the public already for your project will therefore need to be taken off your grant allowance for this project. Before you actually submit your application to us, you are able to view the financial overview of your project. This page states the funding rules for the competition, which you can obviously double check that you comply with, including eligible total project costs and the project duration parameters as well. Please do check that your figures are in line with the funding rules that are published for these competitions. And to note that your total project costs must be within the published eligible cost parameters rather than the funding sort. So please don't confuse the difference between grant amount and total project costs, because if you misinterpret what that means, it may be that you submit an application which falls outside of the parameters that we have, and therefore you'd be classed as ineligible, and your application wouldn't be sent for assessment, and therefore you have no chance of being funded through these competitions. And finally, if any organisation wishes to participate in a project within these competitions but not actually claim any grant funding, that is fine. you will need to select the not requesting funding option within the innovation funding service, but still fill out the project cost section, as your cost will still contribute towards things such as the level of research proportion of total project, for example. You will not need to be named, well, you will not be named in the grant offer letter should you be successful, but you will still need to be named in the collaboration agreement across your consortium, because although there will be no legal relationship between a non-grant claiming partner and Innovate UK, there will obviously still be some kind of legal relationship between a non-grant claiming partner and the other members of a project consortium. Okay, the finances for academic partners are handled slightly differently, and for these competitions, these are processed through the GES system. This system is already very familiar with academics and universities alike. It's actually owned by the research councils rather than Innovate UK, and it validates cost for us to produce the 80% full economic cost figure that we then use going forward in your project. Academic partners will only need to complete the Your Project Cost section within the Innovation Funding Service portal. This must be completed for them to be included as an official collaborator within a project. This next slide shows you which fields need to be completed for academic partners in the Innovation Funding Service, which must be identical to the with council status PDF GES document that you will also need to upload alongside your project costs. And as I mentioned, given that the GES system is not actually owned by us, any queries that you have relating to the GES system or academic costs in general are best directed to the GES help desk, whose contact details are provided on the screen. Now, in terms of actually submitting your application to us, this next slide shows the project cost summary for a project with all of the partners and collaborators included within the consortium. This is actually the level of detail that assessors will be able to see of your project costs when they're actually marking your proposals. And it's also the level of detail that fellow members of your consortium will be able to see of the various partners. So the detail behind these cost categories can only be seen by the individual organisations concerned. So you'll only be able to see your own detail project costs. In terms of actually validating project costs, the Innovation Funding Service will check that all partners have marked their finances as complete, and that will need to happen before you can actually submit your application to us. And it will also check that the research proportion of total project costs is no greater than 30%, which is obviously the cap that we have in place across both the feasibility studies and the R&D competitions. It will then flag to you if there are any issues for you to address before you can then submit your application to us. You will then have the option to review any aspect of your application, including the questions as well as the finances, before you then submit it to us. And as Jonathan's already mentioned, we do recommend that you leave plenty of time to finalise your application because the deadline that we have in place is absolute, and under no circumstances are we able to adjust that deadline once the competition's been published. So when you are happy with your application and everything has been completed and you are ready to submit, you can simply click on the green icon and you'll be taken to this confirmation page within IFS, which also outlines the next steps in the competition process. Please do submit your application to us. It sounds like quite a simple piece of advice, but quite a few occasions now we have come across applicants who have completed everything within an application and got to 100% complete, but because they've not actually pressed the green button to submit it to us, as far as we're concerned, the visibility that we have within IFS, it doesn't show as a submitted application, and therefore we can't do anything with it. We had a case of that just this morning, in fact. So applicants can spend hours of time filling in every single bit of an application, but if it doesn't actually get submitted to us, then unfortunately you may as well have not bothered at all. So please do make sure that you always submit and that you do have the confirmation that you've submitted. This next slide, you may not be able to see too clearly, but this shows the number of applicants for a previous competition, and to be honest, it could be any of our previous competitions, submitting their proposals each hour leading up to the noon deadline that we had in place for that competition. So as you can see, the majority of applicants do leave it until the final hours or even the final minutes or seconds, to be perfectly honest, to actually submit their application to us. We therefore strongly recommend that you submit perhaps a little bit earlier than this, in plenty of time to avoid any last-minute technical issues. We don't anticipate there ever being technical issues with our system. However, if it gets to 11:55 on the day of the deadline and you have an issue with your application, it's very unlikely you're going to be able to contact us and for us to be able to fix that issue for you in that 5-minute period before the deadline. So just to reiterate once again, please do consider submitting your application early. And once you have actually submitted to us, you can always return to your dashboard page within the Innovation Funding Service, which shows you the status of any applications that you have started or indeed submitted to us. Okay, I'll talk briefly now about the assessment process that we have in place for these competitions. So all applications that are actually submitted to us and pass our eligibility check will be assessed by 5 independent assessors from both industrial and academic backgrounds. We then collate these to produce a total average score per application that we put out for assessment. In terms of what assessors are actually looking for, some key things include clarity with the appropriate amount of information and detail. So assessors don't want to be completely overloaded and bombarded with detail, but at the same time, they don't want to be left making guesses and assumptions as to what you're trying to say within your application or what you're actually trying to do within your project. So it's about finding the appropriate balance between those two. Make sure that your responses are always justified in your responses to the questions and also quantified where necessary. And finally, a viable opportunity for growth must be clearly presented within your application, which therefore necessitates an injection of public funding. And once applications have been assessed and scored, feedback will be made available to you, and that will be made available to you within your IFS dashboard, which will obviously explain why you've been given certain scores for certain questions, and the project lead to your consortium will be notified when the feedback is available for you to view. So we are actually running interview panels as part of the assessment process for the research and development competitions as part of this round. If you're not familiar with these, they take the form of a bit of a Dragon's Den style format. You can bring up to 9 people to attend an interview from your consortium. These interviews are for the ones that score highly enough at the initial written assessment stage for research and development projects. You have 30 minutes to present up to 30 slides, which then leads on to a 40-minute Q&A session led by a panel of up to 5 assessors. And there may be an additional 10-minute Q&A session as well, following 10 minutes of closed discussion by the assessors. You do have the opportunity to provide a response to your initial written feedback ahead of the interview panel to help the assessors prepare for the interview. And also your response to feedback, your presentations, and your list of attendees must be provided ahead of the interview. And we also ask that you bring to the interview a draft version of your collaboration agreement as well. But further information on this will be made available to you should you be invited to participate in the interview stage. Successful applicants will then go through to the project setup process within the Innovation Funding Service, which looks a little something like this, with all of the required setup milestones listed as headings. You as applicants therefore have good visibility of what you need to complete and also what we need to complete internally, which should hopefully speed up the process of actually getting your project off the ground, as obviously there is a deadline in place for actually getting your project started for these competitions. And each of these headings must show as complete before we can actually issue you with a grant offer letter, which is when you can actually go and begin working on your project. I've highlighted this as one of the key milestones as part of the project setup process, which is obviously the collaboration agreement. So obviously we require signed collaboration agreements for all projects that are collaborative, and obviously you have to be collaborative to apply for these competitions. So you must return a signed collaboration agreement. This stipulates the relationship within the consortium across the various members, and from my experience of working at Innovate UK is probably the most common cause for delay in projects starting and getting off the ground due to things such as IP agreements. So we do recommend that you work on these as early as possible, and obviously there is a requirement for the R&D competition within Faraday 3 that you have a draft version of your collaboration agreement at the interview stage. Once you have actually got through all of that and you've started your project, it's important to know that grant is paid quarterly in arrears, and you can only claim grant against costs which have actually been incurred and defrayed during the project period in question. You therefore need to be very careful in terms of your cash flow and your cost management as well. And projects will also be subject to quarterly monitoring by an appointed Innovate UK monitoring officer, and he or she will introduce themselves to you further along in the process should you be successful in applying for these competitions. Okay, thank you very much for listening to that, and I'll happily now take any questions that you have.
Right. Naz, are you going to help me with this one? Yeah. Okay, so we've got questions on the application process. You hold on to that, Mike. That'd be cool. Any questions from the floor? One over here. You got your Fitbit on today, Naz. Yeah.
One of the categories on the financials was something to do with capital, equipment. I can't remember the category name now.
Capital usage.
Capital usage. Can you explain a little bit further what that is?
Yeah, so the capital usage is one of the main cost categories that we have at Innovate UK. And in that category, you can claim for the depreciation that is directly attributed to the project itself. So for assets which you may already have, which may already be yours within your organisation, or new ones that you're going to go out and buy, it works out the depreciation that is actually as a result of the project. So you state various things, such as whether it is new or existing, the value of the asset at the start of the project, the value at the end of the project, and then you actually provide a percentage which is your estimation of the level of that asset required to deliver the project. So it might be that an asset is going to depreciate by £100,000 throughout the lifetime of your project, and you can estimate that about 30% of that will be as a result of doing this project, and IFS will then calculate the total value at the end. And full guidance on all of the cost categories is available online, so if you want to explore that further, then you can.
Okay, thanks. Application process questions? Yes?
You know the previous public funding that you have to state, does that include EU funding, or is that just from the UK?
It's a good question. I would say UK, but obviously that is only funding that you have in place to deliver the future project. So if you've received grant funding from the UK public sector in the past for previous bits of work which don't really relate to what you're about to do, then you don't need to declare that at all.
But so, you know, with the Horizon 2020 thing, if you've applied for a grant and got that for a similar project, you wouldn't have to state that on the Innovate bid?
Not if this project for Faraday Round 3 is going to be separate and distinct from the work that you have in place for that.
Okay.
Because we always say there shouldn't ever be any kind of overlap or crossover of cost between projects. So we like to make sure that all projects that we fund, the costs are specific to that project. So you're only doing bits of work that are specific to a new project rather than anything outside of that, any kind of BAU or alternative projects that you have going on.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Okay. Right. There you go.
Hello. Just want to understand a little bit about the funding. So I have some Innovate UK funding that will run from October until the end of March. Does that mean I'm ineligible to apply for a further development? Because obviously your deadline's December. So that even though one will finish and I'll be applying for funding that then goes on after, there is an overlap, even though that I'm not claiming twice, but I've still got Innovate UK money that will still be live.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. We see various organisations quite often are participating in various projects, often simultaneously. As long as there's no overlap in terms of what the project costs are or what the grant is, then we just regard that as separate and distinct, separate bit of work, separate project, and therefore you don't need to worry about it.
Thank you.